Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Purposeful Play, Intentional Talk, Inclusive Oral Language Practices for Kindergarten. I'm really happy to have our presenters, Angeline and Melinda, here today, and I am grateful for all of you for joining us for this important conversation. I am Alicia. I'm the Executive Director of Dyslexia Canada, and I'm excited to welcome you into this space. And I'd like to start off our session today with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that ONLit's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibility to our relationships and the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. And I encourage everyone to put your own acknowledgement in the chat. Again, funding for ONlit is provided by the Ontario Ministry of Education. We are very happy to be able to continue to do this work, and we hope to be here for many years to continue to support you. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Angeline and Melinda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. It's really great to be here with you today, and thank you for taking the time to join us. And I am super excited to be joined by Melinda today also. So our agenda for today, we're going to look at focusing on oral language, considering how we might foster oral language in an inclusive environment, talk about building background knowledge and vocabulary, bridging phonemic awareness, and then have some time for Q&A. So as Alicia mentioned, I'm Angeline Humber. I am a teacher consultant with Greater Essex County District School Board. I have been working, and Melinda will talk a little bit more about this, but I have been working at the school board, particularly connected to what we know now as the science of reading since 2019, very in-depth. Before that, we were definitely doing work in that realm, but just definitely deepened our understanding around that time. I also support all of our FI programs. So when we talk about multilingual learners and ensuring our programs offer learning for all students and support educators, that is important. And also when we talk about working with our interventionists from K to 2, I am part of the team that supports all of that for English and for French.
I'm Melinda Hinch. I'm a speech language pathologist. I recently retired from Greater Essex School Board after 33 years of service. I've been on the science of reading journey for well over 15 years now when the OPA projects came years ago. Angeline and I started working together, Angeline being from program, me being from spec ed. We started working together probably 12, 13 years ago. And then quite intensively since 2019, joining together, taking down the silos and working together to push our school board forward in this capacity. I now have a small private practice in the evenings. I work with Tier 3 students and certainly enjoy practicing what I have taught for the past so many years. And it's so nice to be with you all today.
One really important part I'd like to note about our collaboration is we didn't always agree on everything. So we each had our own background knowledge and experience and really looked to research to inform our conversations and to do the best that we could based on those things that we found and what we knew. So we're going to start with a little bit about why focusing on oral language is important. So thinking back, and thank you very much to Melissa Smith for her drop-in session on oral language, thinking about how much vocabulary and oral language supports that vocabulary growth, listening comprehension, syntax, that oral narrative growth, and really gives students that ability to access rich texts as they grow and learn through their education. It helps build that confidence and fluency in speaking and interacting with one another, and knowing for children who speak dialects or have multiple varieties of dialects, that it helps really bridge that home and language practice with what is happening at school. So knowing that it is also very foundational to learning, and I know Melinda's going to bring a lot of her experience connected to that into our presentation today. So if you did want some more information just connected to this directly, Melissa Smith's drop-in session on oral language did a large focus on that. So knowing from the effective early reading instruction document, this is where this graphic comes from, but really knowing that students develop that oral language proficiency by listening and speaking through experiences with other language, and really looking at how that connects to their foundation for reading. So that strong reading comprehension really needs them to be able to derive meaning from the oral language and combine it with that fluency as they grow and learn. So that looking at how that continues to impact reading proficiency as they progress through school and build a growing vocabulary. Wanted to connect because as we go into 2026, September 2026, we want to make sure we're making as many connections as possible to the kindergarten curriculum that we can, just to help you in supporting the implementation of that curriculum. So knowing so much of the curriculum does have a focus on oral language, but these expectations really target that directly. So A1, focusing on that oral and nonverbal communication, that ability to communicate orally and non-verbally. And I know we're going to talk a little bit in particular about that non-verbal piece. What does that look like, sound like, and how do we support students to getting to developing orally? We're going to look at A1.1, listening and responding, using language conventions and nonverbal communication, and how students understand and use new words and develop morphological awareness. So how do we foster oral language in an inclusive environment? So thinking back again to that kindergarten curriculum, and I reflect on this often, and every time I see it, it reminds me how important it is. So we need to see students as competent, capable of complex thinking, curious and rich in potential, valuing and building on their strengths and abilities. And that is for every student. So thinking about what they bring with them is really important. And sometimes it's harder than others. Some days it's harder than others, but really trying to find that and understanding students as capable, competent, and curious. And I know I'm a little cheesy. Anyone who knows me well knows I sometimes my heart is so big, and I can recall writing something connected to one of my kindergarten AQs about every child is really a treasure. And sometimes it takes a little while to find the key to open that treasure. But knowing that linguistic differences and all the differences children bring with them to school should be viewed positively in classrooms and used as strength to really leverage performance and literacy. And wanted to connect. And so if you want more information about the flow of the day, the session with Nikki Alderman was fantastic. And she developed these templates for what it could look like, but also knowing there isn't one single right flow, and we want to be responsive. So we know sometimes it looks a little different in September than it does by the third week of September. Sometimes weather plays an impact. There are often constraints connected to school schedules that we need to consider. So many different things to consider, but just looking at these sample flows of the day and knowing that that oral language fits in throughout the day, and we are able to support vocabulary, comprehension, and how might we consider using that evidence-based systematic and explicit instruction to support or an oral language to support that play-based learning and inquiry. One of the things I was thinking of was the importance of a visual schedule. I know I used actual photos of the children in the class just to remove layers of abstraction of what it looked like when they were doing those things. And that visual schedule is really helpful for students that maybe are working towards that oral communication. Then we're going to take a look at building background knowledge and vocabulary.
Okay, so considerations for program planning. This comes right from the new curriculum. In a supportive learning environment, most students will develop oral language proficiency quite quickly. Most English language learners who have developed oral proficiency in everyday English will still require instructional scaffolding to meet curriculum expectations. Research has shown that it takes 5 to 7 years for most English language learners to catch up to their English-speaking peers in their ability to use English for academic purposes. And in our curriculum, the process of developing vocabulary involves acquiring new words and understanding their meanings when reading and listening and writing and speaking.
And knowing too.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Melinda. So just thinking Sometimes words have different meanings in different contexts.
Mhm.
For learners that are working through that sometimes that creates an extra layer for them to navigate through.
Sometimes more than one. So I'm gonna level the playing field. We're just going to redefine all the strands of oral language just to make sure we're on the same level. And I'm going to go into a lot of the research. Every intervention that we're going to be introducing, every activity is research based. So when we talk about vocabulary, we know that it's the knowledge of words and word meanings, both in comprehension, and that's understanding, and use. We know vocabulary is one of the essential pillars towards understanding. If more words are known and interpreted, the bigger the capacity and the chance to know more, to explore further, and discover greater things. And we know vocabulary plays a vital role in allowing students to gain deeper understanding in complex subjects, concepts, and higher level ideas introduced across the curriculum. And we know about the tiers of interventions, right? We've been so introduced, and it's stated in the curriculum. We'll talk about tier 2 words in a minute, but we know words have different roles within the tiers. Beck et al. Had a marvelous book that came out about 15 years ago that is solid, stating what the tiers are and the impacts on them. So we know about tier 1 words. Those are our basic everyday words that we get through conversations and dialogue. And we have our tier 2 words, which are the words that we see in our text, the words that are critically important to the comprehension of those texts. They're the words that we often don't use in our conversations. They're words that the text doesn't give the meanings of the words. There are words that if you open up a dictionary, it's not going to give you the exact definition of that word, but they're highly important words. And for the sake of kindergarten, we call them wow words a lot of time, the wow words. And our tier 3 words are our curricular, our thematic based words that are infrequent but important to that particular area of study. So the next slide shows you how it's written in our new curriculum. It basically states, flip the slide, Angeline, and you can see the next slide. It's tier 2 words is explicitly stated as being important to introduce at the kindergarten level. However, for the purpose of this talk, we are talking a lot about inclusive education, inclusive language, and we have students who are language impoverished coming into our classrooms. We have kids coming in who will be getting diagnoses of developmental language disorders. We have kids coming in with cognitive struggles that impact their communication. We have children who are multi-language learners. So we have a classroom full of students at different communication levels, and their goal at this point might not be tier 2 words, because tier 2 words bank on tier 1 words.
And it's interesting, Melinda, because I'm thinking of myself from the FI perspective. They're all new words, right? As for
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know you and I have been talking, we were talking long before the pandemic about our concerns about the impact of things like screen time, not just children having screen time, but adults looking at screens and not interacting maybe as much as they once did.
They used to, right.
I know that I have some nieces and nephews that are new parents, and they're really working hard not to do those things. So I don't want to generalize, but also knowing that that is something we've been talking about for a long time, that children, we were concerned about the level of vocabulary they were coming with in their home language to the classroom.
Right. And I think kindergarten educators would certainly agree that is something that is happening more and more in their classrooms. They see more of that language deprivation.
And I know too, like I'm very fortunate to get to work with so many educators. We have conversations around, families are really doing the best that they can with where we are now. Many of them, it's just, especially given our current environment, they're working a lot, they're doing all sorts of things. So having time to spend with their children and have those rich interactions is limited. So how can we even consider how we might best be able to support them?
Okay, so semantics, the definition, semantics is based on word relationships. This is where English is so tricky because we can have one word with several meanings. We have antonyms, we have synonyms, we have figures of speech. I still remember one of my very first placements years ago when I was in the Halton board and I was in a language classroom. And this little boy was, jumping all over the place. And I said, so and so, looks like you have ants in your pants. And the look on his face when he took me literally. Um, Again, our language is full of figures of speech, and 1 in 3 words in English is a multiple meaning word. So English can be very complicated for new language learners as well as students that have some struggles in that area. But it's important that we work on that. And we're going to be going into some areas on how we work on semantics to build up those vocabulary files. And Angeline made this beautiful graphic. I'll let her speak to it.
And I know I worked really closely with the English vocabulary session, and we shared this with both sessions. So looking at that semantic vocabulary learning and building those knowledge networks, being able to show understanding. It's interesting, yesterday I just had an NTIP session and we were talking about a student that actually the only word I heard from all year was bleh, and it was whispered through his mother's ear. Yet that child could show me how much he knew. It was amazing, and he was one of the more outgoing students in the class. I know we'll talk about that another time. That's a whole other session. But just how much he could show his understanding through things like sorting, linking new to unknown. So making those connections, being able to recognize multiple meanings for things. For example, here there's a crane, so crane the bird or crane the big machine. How we might be able to use words flexibly. And I know this myself. I've had some conversations because there were resources we used to use in French immersion that were really connecting one gesture to one word. And I was like, but small, like we could be talking about, you know, a cup, a small cup, but we could be talking about a person that is small, and it's a different version of small. So just being able to use those words flexibly, learning everyday antonyms and understanding what they mean, and then understanding categories and how we might be able to sort. So whether we're talking about, looking at whether we want to sort food and is it healthy or unhealthy, and that's a whole other conversation there. But looking at what that looks like, sound like. So supporting those networks and features of words, and that's really directly connected to the 2026 kindergarten curriculum also.
Morphology, we're talking about the smallest unit of meaning. You can have inflectional morphemes where you can have it changes by plurality, by tense. Then you can have derivational morphemes, which the word changes by adding on an affix. We know it's important for vocabulary, reading comp, and spelling. However, the nuances in many of these are so subtle that they're often difficult for language learners to acquire quickly.
I'm thinking of how many things they're acquiring at especially in kindergarten.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, there's the morphology. Again, this curriculum does a wonderful job at laying it all out. Exactly what we thought we were hoping what happened has happened. They're talking about the common suffixes and how they need to be addressed, and compound words. And again, it crosses over to the other side of the rope where like the phoneme for dogs is heard different than cats. One sounds like a z and one sounds like a s. So it's all those nuances that are introduced in kindergarten, which is really quite exciting.
And I really love the working with groups of words, right? Like those word families too, especially for our multilingual learners, helping them make those connections to those pieces.
Okay, so syntax are the rules that govern which words can go beside each other to create sentences. Again, syntax is important orally. It's important for reading comp. It's important for writing. And again, there are a lot of subtle changes. There's a lot of quiet words that make it difficult for our language learners. How do children learn vocabulary and oral language? So they used to make fun of me at some of my staff meetings for how many times I would say the word data, and they would take votes on the number of times I would say it in one meeting. So the research is very strong that vocabulary and oral language is learned both ways, through incidental learning, and those are rich oral discussions across the day. We're going to talk about some strategies for that, as well as direct instruction. And we use the word direct, we mean explicit. Okay, so that's robust instruction. That's where we use our repeated shared readings of narratives and expository text, as well as direct instruction using some word strategies.
And there's a great webinar from Melissa Manette Smith too that really looks at some of the explicit instruction about those shared readings. And I know that you've also shared, actually it was you shared it with me. I remember the work by Laura Justice, the Read It Again, and the power of that, right? And even not just read it again, but that backwards design and reading with that intentionality. So thank you so much for always sharing with me, Melinda.
And we're not going to touch on that today because it was touched on through Melissa, but know how important that is. So I'm going to walk us through some research and some developmental nature of how vocabulary is acquired for us. So students generally, I'm going to talk about word exposure first. Students generally need to hear words, and we're talking neurotypical developing in the same language classroom, need to hear words 4 to 14 times to recognize it and to understand it. For students with language differences or learning a new language, they require over 40 exposures to that word. Okay, so that's what exposure means. And we talk about word storage. It is gradual. It's a gradual process. So when infants and toddlers and young children and older children are first hearing new words, they're storing them initially according to the stress patterns that they hear within those new words. And the more exposures, the more they hear that word, store them according to the vowel intonations. And then as they hear it more and more, they're going to store them according to number of syllables. And as they get more exposure, they're storing them with the initial sounds and then final sounds. So you see how many times hearing a word is very, very important for that storage to occur. So with repeated exposure to the same word, children are going to fill in the rest of the word, which means that phonological form gets stronger and stronger like a light bulb. So words are stored in the lexicon by how they sound, not how they're spelt. Sounds like the other side of the rope, right? They are stored phonetically and morphologically. So this is when you're going to hear students make errors that are phonetic. For example, if it hasn't been consolidated, they might use the word unicorn for acorn. They might use the word pine cone or pineapple for porcupine. So with more exposures, each definition is going to be stored with that label. And each phonologically represented word that is stored along with its definition includes syntactic information about that word and morphologic information about that word. So if we look at the word whisper, we've heard this before, whisper, right? Whisper syntactically can be a noun, right? I hear a whisper, or it can be a verb. Who's whispering? So there's syntactic information regarding that word. Also, the word can be the root word whisper, right? It's a root word. It can have affixes, suffixes, like the plural, whispers. It can have verb tenses, whispering, whispered, but it's not going to get tion, shun, at the end of it. So Again, the stronger the phonetic representation, the faster that representation is activated. So what's going to happen? That child is going to look up the meaning to comprehend what the speaker is saying, whether the word was used in its uninflected form, whisper, or in a morphologically or more complex syntactic form, whispering or whispered. So I always compare this to a light bulb starting off quite dim, right? Initially, the light bulb is quite dim, and with more exposures, that light bulb gets brighter and brighter and stronger and stronger. Now, the research shows us there are 4 variables that influence vocabulary learning. The first one is quantity. Children who hear more words learn more words, okay? The second one is frequency. A word that is repeated more often is learned faster than a word that is repeated less often. Quality. This ties into our tier 2 vocabulary. Children who hear a high proportion of sophisticated words have a greater knowledge of them than others. And fourth is the context. Words are more likely to be learned if they're embedded in helpful or instructive interactions. So when you put all of this research together, this guides us for our incidental learning of vocabulary and our explicit direct instruction of vocabulary.
I know we're going to share some of the ways that we can use that research in practice. So one of the things we did want to connect back to was from the October oral language session. And also there was a book talk about the Strive for 5 and how you can use those Strive for 5 model to really support oral language. So starting with those open-ended questions and working through, the book provides some great examples of that. And if you are a French educator and you purchase the book, there is a French support document to go with it. But thinking about when we're looking at that upward scaffolding and what that looks like, so making sure that we provide students with opportunities to ask about connections or patterns, ask for inferences or predictions, and ask as for cause and effect or a solution to a problem, and thinking about when we might use that upward scaffolding to ask students to explain reasoning, thinking, push them to look for patterns or generalize, and challenge them. But also, particularly when we're talking about students that require that additional support, ensuring that we consider downward scaffolding. So maybe reducing choices with either or questions, using the close technique, so where they're filling in the blank and giving the answer to the child and having them repeat it. So that I do, we do, you do model. Thinking about how we might be able to reframe, simplify questions, offer that corrective feedback in a meaningful way, recast their response by modeling formal syntax and grammar. And I know in FI we're doing this a lot, but doing it in a very considerate way, how we might model the language for students, and what does that look like, sound like. And one of the things that I learned from Melinda back when we started working together was this technique of OWL. So observe. And I know sometimes it's an automatic instinct to want to jump into things. So just observing, waiting, and listening, and considering how you might enter into that conversation. And I really like the connections when I think of OWL, Melinda, to what we read within Strive for 5 and how we might be able to incorporate those two things together. Don't know if you had anything to add.
Right.
So
well, if you're jumping into a conversation and it's not what the student wants to talk about, your communication is going to be shut down at that point, right? So it's very important that you are cognizant of that child's level, their communication level, and as well what they're interested and what they're doing in that moment of play.
Also found observing, because sometimes we make assumptions when we don't observe first for a moment about what's happening. And so when we observe, we can actually be more cognizant of what is actually happening. And also one of the things that I know Melinda did extensive work on within our board was this pop in, pop out. So where you're going in, you're modeling you're modeling that appropriate language, whether it be connected to mathematics or literacy or the 4 frames within the kindergarten or 4 strands as we will have in 2026, but how we might be able to pop into something, support that vocabulary, and then pop out and join and engage with another group. So I'm thinking back to that flow of the day and how might that work within there.
Right. We posted these in all of our kindergarten rooms at that time. One, we did a focus on math vocabulary. Another time we were doing a focus on emotional literacy, emotional vocabulary. But again, knowing your student and knowing when you pop in, oh, I have to work on tier 1 vocabulary with these 3 friends. Oh, with these 2, I can work on higher level, like tier 2 emotional vocabulary words. So we're talking about, 3 minutes, 5 minutes with this group, and then moving on to another group during their play.
And it, to me, is that small group instruction connected to the other strand of the rope, right? Thinking about how that looks for that piece.
Right. A lot of it's incidental at that time, and a lot of it's direct. It's hard to separate the two. So we're going to get into some other resources that we shared in our schools. I'm really excited to do that. So 3 years ago, after the summer learning program, there was a little bit of money left in the spec ed budget. And whenever I hear that, I ask for it. And I always have data behind me to try to get some things into our kindergarten rooms and any other type of rooms that need support. And at that point, we were getting all of these literacy kits in our classroom. They were heavily and importantly so for the word recognition side of the rope, which is really important. Conan boxes and chips and magnetic wands, et cetera, et cetera. We did have one, we didn't want our educators thinking that pendulum was just swinging to that area. We wanted to balance it with the other side of the rope as well. So I looked at getting these big, beautiful books with thematic pictures and looking at scopes and sequences, developmental nature of vocabulary and oral language. And we were able to get these books. There's a set of 4 into all of our low socioeconomic school kindergarten classrooms, and they were sharing them as well if there was French immersion classrooms in there, because we noticed the goals were basically the same for French and for children requiring extra language support. So the speech paths went into those schools and we modeled, and this is what we did. You're going to hear me saying that we have target words that we're going to work on, and we made visuals for them. So you'll see right down there, I made some linear word visuals, and I put they were always posted. Those words aren't posted for the students to read or write, even though they like to write them after, right? And they're there for the adults to model, for the adults to use, so that we can really establish those language goals. So I would go into the classrooms and my colleagues would go in and we would have some type of language goal posted, and we'd flip to a page and we'd do whole group and small group instruction with these wonderful pictures. And as you can see, it was totally engaging for the students. Now we took data on this. So we used Laura Justice's narrative assessment protocol for students that had some language, and then we did mean length of utterance. My speech path friends would know what that is for students that were just talking in 1 to 3 word sentences. So we did track it, and we had delayed control in other classrooms across the city. So they would get the big books like 2 months later, and we would do it then. And we saw huge gains in these students' syntax, morphology, and vocabulary area. And again, Laura Justice is a queen of narrative development. She, her narrative assessment protocol was a great tool to use. And so on the picture on the left, you see a communication disorder assistant. the school that she is at that point is the first school typically that our refugees come to in our city. Very low language levels in that school. And the sentence strips that she has posted for the educators to use are just talking in complete sentences. It is, I see, very basic sentence structure, because those, again, those kids are coming in MLL, very language impoverished in that area, and a lot of struggles in language development. So we had great success, and even our speech paths, when they go into those rooms, will find those books and they'll use those and follow through on some interventions. So all of our schools have access to lesson picks. It's kind of like Boardmaker, but this is how we made our visuals that went in. And one of the science of reading teachers that specializes in French, she helped me make them in French as well. So we had them in both languages. Again, they were posted. And as we know, prepositions are very hard for our students. They're very subtle. They have to, they take a long time for our students to comprehend and use. So we put a lot of emphasis in using prepositions and prepositional phrases in full sentences. And believe it or not, we would leave the room and the children would take those books right off the stand and take them to their old centers, or they would come up to the chart board and they would be little teachers teaching each other. Another resource that you may or may not know of comes from the Syntax Project that came out of Australia, and that I kind of did some work with a few years ago in tying it more to Canadian content. But noticing with that, it started in grade 1. The first term in grade 1 with it was oral language, but there's a whole set of early learners that we could do the exact same thing with. So I created some slide decks using lots of my own photos and free photos. It follows a scope and sequence of forming a complete sentence and getting more and more complex. It uses the gradual release of responsibility that's used in other interventions, the I do, we do, you do. And it uses beautiful photos, pictures, artwork, and there's always at the end of every slide deck, there's a blank spot that you can insert your own photo. Yeah, I can answer that in a few minutes. So, so this is just the basic one, who, what, and where. So again, the educator is going to start with the introduction. That's the I do, the what's the puppy. Come on, we have these really cute, engaging pictures. The prepositional phrase is in the cup, and you're modeling the puppy is in the cup. Okay, and then it goes, I'm going to do it a couple times in the I do. It is really so self-explanatory to download. If you don't like the pictures, if you don't like the wording we use, you can certainly use your own. But here's the kitty is in the garbage can. And you'll see a lot of pictures of my own children that I put in there, and they're not children anymore. And then we get into the we do. And this is very telling for our language learners, because the mouse is in the hat. You might hear a student saying, him in the hat, right? Or mouse in hat. And that is also your time to go back and don't lose an opportunity for syntax at all. It's a great time to give the model again and to have the students say it again. Again, koala in the tree. And this is where the students do it without your support. This becomes a little assessment as well. So then at the end of each one, you insert your own picture and you're good to go. They really take about 10 minutes in a whole group, or it can be used in small group as well. And then you'll see at the bottom, they get far and far more complex. So it goes from very simple sentences to using linear words and conjunctions. So we do it. There's some slide decks on first, next, then finally, and some great activities. Your adverbs. So you'll see again, it goes into it's the same formula for every slide deck. I wouldn't start with linear words first. You start with the scope and sequence first of what is a complete sentence. So there's the I do for planting a seed. You're modeling first. You're giving lots of gestures. You're using lots of rhythm and melody when you talk, because our language learners need that rhythm and need the gestures and need the repetitions. You see repetition, repetition, and it's okay. Again, you can add whatever one that you're doing, whatever matches your inquiry at that time. Okay, and then you would insert your own. If you don't have to use a slide deck to do that. You could have photo cards that you could use, or you could have calendars that they still give out. Those calendars, the Canadian wildlife ones, are wonderful for supporting syntactic structures. But they also, though, you'll notice with those slide decks that they cover morphology and they cover syntax. So both areas are going to be addressed within those decks. So another thing that we got, another intervention, a tool that we got into all of our classrooms, K to 3, and I understand that this year they went into all 4 to 6 classrooms into their literacy kits. Again, we wanted to make sure that educators know that there's the other side of the rope as well, is the expanding expression tool. And I have mine right here. And I was so excited that they went into the kits. They go, Angeline, are you singing the song? And I'm going to reiterate the importance for our language learners and our students with language struggles, the importance of music. And I'm going to say this again and again and again. Music is addressed in another area of the brain. And by creating those neural networks to the oral language part, it strengthens it. And I'll tell you why. How come I can remember the tune to Spider-Man and I can't remember where I parked my car in the mall? Okay. Music is so strong, right? We know the work of music therapists. It's wonderful. We need more music therapists. It is so strong. That is going to be one of your keys to get your students who struggle with language on that language boat. Music, music, music. Okay. So, Ange, you want me to sing or do you want to sing it?
I would often sing, and even if it wasn't a song, there would be something that I would make into a song, because it would just.
No, I used to be in your kindergarten class and I would hear you sing. I know. Yeah.
Change your voice and sing the same song, but with like rock and roll or country style.
Right. So here it goes. So this is called the expanding expression tool, EET. And it goes green, group, blue, do. What does it look like? What is it made of? Pink, parts, white, where? What else do I know? So we call this little guy Ichi, right? Cute little name. We don't call him Ichi when you're using it in grade 4 and 5. It grows. So it's a color-coded system, okay? And each color represents a specific detail to describe an object or a concept. So green, that's your category, your group name. Blue is blue do, that's your function. This is your appearance. What does it look like? Size, shape, and color. Brown, what's the item made of? Pink, parts. White, where do you find the item or concept? And there's your background knowledge, is your orange. What else do I know about it? So if we were talking at springtime, let's say we're talking about a raincoat, okay? What group does raincoat belong to? It belongs to, right? It's clothing. It's not a pet. It's not a color. It's not a food. It's clothing, right? And usually that's one of the higher conceptual things for our students to grasp onto is that category. Giving them choices is a good idea. What do you do? Blue do. What do you do with the raincoat? And what does it do? Well, you wear it and it keeps you dry. What does it look like? Well, mine's yellow. Yeah, mine's yellow and it's long. What's it made of? Mine's made of kind of like a plasticky, it's a rubbery feeling. Pink parts. Mine has a hood and a zipper, and it has a button. It has a button on the top. Where do I keep it? Well, I keep it in my closet at home, and my mom got it for me at Walmart. And what else do I know? My sister has one just like it, but it's pink. Okay. Or I wear it to keep dry, or I wear it anyways because I just like it. So you can, what we do in kindergarten is we use big chart paper. We got the colored balls there, and the educator is writing down all the information and then putting it back into oral sentences for the students at the end. So it's really, it's a great way to really start your organization of descriptions. It's a great start. And, it can lead up, just so people know that if you really know how the resource works, it turns into a graphic organizer that you can tweak for each grade and areas of the curriculum studied. So when you get into habitats in grade 1 and 2, your pink part would be, what is my part to help this animal? What is my part, what have humans done that have hurt this animal? You might be doing biographies in grade 6, and you might be looking at what is it made of, and that might be the characteristics of that character. So it's tweaked accordingly, and it's great for students who need extra language support to use. Now, it was created by a speech path in Michigan named Sarah Smith. She did heavy research on it. She also researched it, this is really important, with students with language differences. And I'm going to also talk a little bit about that in a different, later on, about looking at who the subjects are in the research we follow. But again, our school board, when we wouldn't invest in something like this if we didn't study it on our own. We brought it into multiple kindergarten classes, did delayed controls, and we studied them among all of the students in that class and saw great gains. Again, more gains in the low socioeconomic schools than in the higher socioeconomic schools.
I really appreciated it in my French immersion kindergarten classroom. My song was in French then, though, but also I thought it's a really remarkable support in that even using the same thing. I know our friend Tammy, who supports intermediate students, said she used the same tool for supporting writing, more effective writing with intermediate students, and it worked extremely well. So just the power of
right. So you're right. I just saw the comment about it not being in classrooms. However, it's the nature of the graphic organizer. So you can use any type of semantic web to have a word and have the spindles go out. The spindle could go out saying the group, the parts, the function, right? It's the same thing. It was just marketed as a cute little character. You can have the resource in your classroom by making that graphic organizer, or just putting semantic web into an AI search, and you'll get a lot of great templates for that. And same as the books that we had. That's what I showed at the end. You don't need to get the book. You can take any type of picture and tie it into working on prepositional phrases, tying it into using a complete sentence. That was a good point. Thanks for reminding that. So we're also we talked about the 4 variables behind vocabulary. And what we did there, again, is using target words and posting the words. Okay. So you'll see that we have a pizza making center going on, and we posted first, then, next, finally, because there's so much sequencing going on. And we want those kids to use those words when they're telling us how they make the process of making pizza. But we post the words. So in one classroom, we had a Tim Hortons area going on, and we posted the words for all levels of language learners. We had hot and cold for the coffee. We had big, medium, and small for the cups. We had words like delicious, whatever. The whole school knew that we had these words posted, and when anybody walked in to that center, they would use those posted words with the children. So the principal would use those words, the caretaker would come and use those words, the principal of the program department came in, and she got down and she ordered a medium-sized coffee and said it was too hot and used some of the other words. So again, it's a way of infusing those words into context.
And again, thinking of those targeted words and supporting vocabulary, but also how we might be able to use graphic organizers to further develop language. So thinking of that I see, I think, I wonder aspect of things and how we might be able to use that just again throughout the day. Remember, inside, outside, and when we're learning outdoors too, how we might be able to incorporate those elements.
Just other ways of doing it. Thinking of all of your math words. The math words at the kindergarten level aren't your tier 3 words net technically at that point in time, right? They're other words, and posting them as well. So and using them part, whole, more, less, and using those words over and over again. Again, when you look at light, lighter, lightest, then you're tying it into your morphology development. Another great research tool are barrier games. And again, you don't need any special resources to create a barrier game. Barrier game, it's interacting activities in which players use verbal instructions to replicate a scene or arrangement without seeing the other person's materials. It's kind of like the game Battleship that we used to play years ago, right? So you could just put a file folder there and you have identical pictures or whiteboards or whatever it is, and you go back and forth, and you might have a stronger language learner with one that's not so strong, and you might be working on prepositions. So you'll see the areas have a lot, put two grocery store scenes on each side. So the one student might say to the other student, put the bananas on the middle shelf, right? Or put the groceries in the bag, or some of that. And then you remove the file folder and you see the corresponding match going up. And it gives you immediate feedback for following that language. And Angeline had a great picture here with the barrier itself as the actual children.
And actually, I was really fortunate to be part of Aki's Zone Petit Enfant. So this is in one of those classrooms that I got to visit, and the students were describing to each other what to draw without looking, and of course, comparing at the end what their drawings look like. So it's a form of barrier game, again, as Melinda said.
There is a new Dr. Lisa Archibald, is the professor at Western University in school language. And a few weeks ago, she interviewed a colleague of ours, Paula Filangeri, who talks about the development of questions and using questions to get more language out of students. So I encourage you, if you have an extra 45 minutes when you're driving, listen to Shining Lights. And Paula gives a great idea on when you're popping in to those students' play areas, how we can use, what type of questions should we use for specific students, and how we can enhance their output.
And I thought back too to some of the reading road trip episodes too.
Mm-hmm.
Re-listen, and this one I want to listen to it again, but some of them really connect to what we're talking about today.
Dynamic assessment, we're always struggling with getting a screening and diagnostic for that oral language and vocabulary. I'm a strong supporter of dynamic assessment. It's knowing your development of vocabulary and oral language, knowing where the student is on that developmental continuum, working on that next step, and going back and reassessing to see if that student made gains. So here's the next slide has a nice little graphic on it. Basically, you're going to test. So if you wanted to know if your student has the prepositions in front, behind, and beside, you're going to test that with activities initially, comprehension of it and its use of it. You're going to take the next, maybe 2 weeks to teach that, and then you're going to go back and retest it to see if they have it. If they don't have it, then maybe we have to do something in our interventions, or maybe we didn't assess them properly in the first place. But if they do have it, we go on to that next step. For language. So it might be going on and looking at linear words first, then next, finally. So Angeline and I developed these together. We used the Oral Language at Your Fingertips resource, which was a resource by Ontario Speech Language Association. They looked at the 5 parameters of oral language. We took one is phonemic awareness. We took the 4 vocabulary, word and sentence structure, text and narrative structure, language comprehension and inferencing. We put it into a few indicators on each one to guide us in that dynamic instruction. So this is a good assessment. So you would look at your student. If your student is not making gains in language the way you would like them to, it's way more, it's very specific, more specific than steps for ELL. And you're able to look at it. So I might say, oh, here I'm looking at vocabulary. And the second thing is using positional words in, out, over, under, up, and down. Again, I might be assessing that. They might not have it. I'm going to find some activities during play to talk about that, to bring it into that discussion, and then go back a few weeks later to see if they have it, and then move on to the next area.
So I know that we have an upcoming drop-in session about phonemic awareness, so we won't spend too much time in this space, but really thinking about how we bridge phonemic awareness for learners in our classrooms, and thinking about how it can be particularly important for English language learners and multilingual learners as they're working in that language of instruction and developing the vocabulary, and thinking about those skills that develop from one language to another and those that perhaps we need to really think about. So when we consider phonemic awareness, that isolating and blending phonemes and segment simple words into phonemes from the curriculum, thinking of this quote from Literacy Foundations for English Language Learners, that those phonological awareness skills can transfer across languages when students have opportunities to build those skills in their native language in English. For English language learners, phonemic activities can be complicated by having to recognize sounds in English that do not exist in their native language. So I was connecting with our consultant that supports our multilingual learners today, and she was talking about, in particular, she has some students where the P and B are particularly challenging because that it's not the same in their language. So just thinking about, and I know that we do have that phonemic awareness session coming up, but many of those skills transfer, but some of them, thinking of our learners, what are those similarities and differences to ensure that we support those sounds that don't exist in their languages at home?
Research, right? So a lot of our research is American based, and it's great. There's great stuff that is coming out with great interventions. And UFly, for one, on the other side of the rope, has been wonderful for our school board and other school boards as well throughout Ontario. However, the kindergarten programs look different in the States than they do in Ontario. Ontario, we have inclusive kindergartens. We have everybody. We have everybody with all these differences and nuances and abilities, right? So when we talk about learning for all, we're talking about learning for all. And when you look at research for our young ones, you have to look at, in their sample, the people that are in their research, do they contain students that have autism, students that have cognitive abilities that affect their language, MLL students? Do they contain that? Because a lot of the time they don't. So when we look at interventions for that, and when we look at their data for that, it doesn't really include those students. And we know that those students, again, we know those students need music and they need extra enunciation, and they need extra practice, and they need extra gestures. We know that. But a lot of the times, MLL students, autistic students, students with developmentally delays are not included in those studies. So be leery of what you know and honor how the brain works with music and gestures and actions. It is really, in our programs, I was at one of my schools visiting last week, and I saw the kids coming in from preschool services. There's 9 kids coming in to this one tiny school with autism spectrum disorder. We know that we have to, do things that are so inclusive and use music and gestures and actions to help their language develop. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Melinda, I did want to just address one of the concerns because I can completely relate to the comment about, purchasing things, but I can tell you myself, I didn't have the big books, so I used the Wimmelbild pictures, those types of pictures that had all sorts of things happening connected to that scene, and especially with free access to Canva now, it's quite easy to be able to make some of those. But also, as Melinda said, when it comes to EET, I know that there's a great resource, an oral language toolkit that was put together in English and in French that's available for free with those free graphic organizers that really support that same kind of.
Yeah, Lisa Archibald put it together from the University of Western Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, you don't need to have it. We were just lucky at that time to be able to jump onto things. But also in kindergarten, if you're able to grab, you know what, your speech language pathologist loves coffee. I'm telling you, coffee and chocolate. Bring a little chocolate bar, ask to meet, during lunch for a few minutes. And they also have ideas for interventions to support oral language development.
But thank you all so much for taking time out of your day today to spend with us.